Hi, I'm Shubham. I graduated in 2013. I've been doing a PhD at UC Berkeley in computer science since, and it's been fun. I hope most of you guys at least pursue graduate studies. Uh, so I think these guys have covered GRE quite well, and like preparation for TOEFL and GRE has already been covered quite well. I'll just say that my preparation style was probably similar to the first speaker, which was prepare for a period of 3 or 4 weeks and try to give 2 hours a day schedule, and sort of that worked out for me. So Shresh had a different probably you will have to figure out your way of preparation for yourself, but Shresh pointed out some really good resources which I took up. Uh, what I'll try to talk more about is so in the last 2 years I've been sort of involved in the Berkeley CS admission committee, so I can talk a bit more about the process and sort of the importance of the factors for admission and a bit more about campus life, so on if you're interested. So I think the first point, since the session is like titled on GRE and TOEFL, is the importance of GRE and TOEFL in admission process. As a lot of people mentioned, is there's sort of a it can only be used to sort of reject your application in the sense if your score is too low, say below 320, as Trish mentioned, then it sort of stands out as a red flag. But for instance, if your score is 25 versus 90, it rarely makes a difference. So what I'm trying to say is that the importance of GRE is mostly to check that you are sort of a sensible person who can speak some English and are not terrible at quant. But once you have cleared those levels, people do not look at GRE score too much to sort of evaluate you in any other way. Uh, then I think the more important factors for admission were probably say uh, things which indicate how good of a researcher you are or how motivated you are. So the first thing they would typically look at are sort of letters of recommendation or your past research experience, and there they try to judge if you have sort of worked on independent problems. Do you know what it's like to do research? And so getting good letters of recommendation really help for those things. And also some professors like to read your SOPs and judge or judge you on that and judge your motivation on that. So that can be sometimes important. And for instance, even if you don't have a good CPI but you have a very good research background, then like obviously a good CPI is like uh, valuable in terms of your admission. But for instance, say so some top universities will sort of flag bad CPI as a red flag and might not consider application, but most of them will, if you have letters of recommendation and research experience and found out for that, consider your application pretty seriously. So that was mostly all I had to say about the factors they sort of look at when considering your application. And as for sort of what happens once you get a PhD, how's the life then? So for me, so far, it's been a great experience. I think people mentioned it before, but there is really a huge freedom on what you want to work, where you want to work, and it's really a very good time to sort of discover your interests. And you do get a chance to work daily on something of a problem that you have chosen and has not been handed down to you, like what would happen in a job. And I think it's a really valuable experience. So I hope all of you will do PhD eventually. So if you are wondering whether you should get a job or a PhD, there's one factor that I would really like to emphasize, which is that even if you do get a PhD, so if you do sort of enroll in a PhD program, you could very, very easily switch back to a job. And if you sort of figure out that a PhD is not for you and so on. But if you sort of go for a job and work for 4 5 years, you are fairly out of touch of academia, and it's pretty hard to get back into research if you at some point realize that you're not liking your job career very much. So the easybility of switching from a grad school to a job of your choosing is a pretty important factor that you guys should consider if you are sort of confused between whether you should go for a PhD or job and you're interested in both. And there's sort of one more aspect, which is funding. So mostly, okay, based on my experience on engineering departments, so in computer science and electrical engineering, say, I think almost all schools, when they give you an admission, offer you sort of funding for 5 years, and you don't have to worry about it. Um, in some programs, so for instance, if you get a master's admission, not a PhD admission, some schools will give you a funded master's, some schools will not give you a funded master's, but you can sort of join the school, and if you and sort of very easily become a TA, or what they call a graduate student instructor, and then that funds your, so it's not a lot of work, it's some reasonable amount of work you get to teach, which I think is also a good experience. But even if you are not funded, my point is that you can still come and become a TA or something, and mostly you can find funding. Uh, if you are enrolled in a PhD, then and you are not funded, then that's kind of a weird situation. I've not known of people. So I've known of a couple of people whose funding situation was dicey, and they were like, the university had not committed for funding, and they had received an admission offer but not a funding offer. And if that's for a PhD program, I would recommend you to sort of weigh other offers that you get, which are guaranteeing you funding more, because it can be a slightly weird situation. If you are enrolled for 5 years and not guaranteed funding, you might have to sort of either do a lot of teaching or depend a lot on your advisor for sort of specific. You might need to do specific projects that he has in mind so that you can get funding and so on. So if you are enrolled for a PhD, try to go for a program which doesn't have funding. If you are sort of going for a master's, then I think even if you don't have funding, just talk to the people who are there in the university. I'm fairly sure it's likely that you can TA and get funding and so on. And apart from that, again, I would like to say that grad life is actually like, it's different from undergrad, but it is very enjoyable. So I think you should pursue it for that sake itself.